right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live for stations that just joined us. We're now into our second segment with John Perkins, best-selling, New York Times best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And John Perkins, johnperkins.org. Reintroduce yourself for some stations that just joined us. Recap, basically your life, how you got involved working for the big international banks in the takeovers of countries, and secondarily, what was it like when you wrote your book? Did you know it'd be a #1 bestseller? What has it been like since then? And then let's move into your expertise on how the world really works in view of what's happening currently with the globalist takeover to the banking system.
Okay, Alex, I'd be happy to do that. And incidentally, the answer to the last question about what's going on now, I have a new book coming out in early November, which addresses that. Its working title is Hoodwinked. I don't know whether that'll be the final title, but I'd really encourage people to subscribe to my newsletter. Just go to johnperkins.org, newsletter, sign-up list, and sign on, and we'll let them know when the book's out and what the title, because it goes into these subjects. I was recruited by the National Security Agency, the nation's largest and most secretive spy organization, back while I was my last year in college in Boston. I went through a whole series of lie detector tests and other tests, and they determined that I would make a good economic hitman, and they also found that I had several hooks that they could use to really encourage me to come in. I think that three big drugs of our culture, I was kind of hooked on sex, power, and those are the big ones: sex, power, and money. And they determined all that, and that they could get me into the fold. It's a long story. It's written up in Confessions in some detail. But eventually, I ended up working for a private organization, Charles T. Main. I became their chief economist, and all of this sort of work now is done not through employees of the government directly, but through outside consultants. It's farmed out to other companies, so the government isn't actually playing any active role. So if I ever get caught, they wouldn't blame the government; they would just blame another dirty business.
So there's corporate surrogates that they use.
Correct, and of course, this was back in 1970. It's become much more prevalent today than it was then. But even then, in this particular case, and I tell a story about the first economic hitman, Kermit Roosevelt, who went in and overthrew a government in Iran. And he was a CIA agent. He was very successful at what he did, but very soon after that, they decided that it shouldn't be a government agent, a CIA agent. It should be someone working for a private corporation. So that's where I came in. And my job really was to corrupt presidents and other top officials of countries that had resources that our corporations covet, oil being one of the biggest ones, but there are many others also. And to really corrupt these people, to get them to accept huge loans for their countries, loans that would basically bankrupt the country, wouldn't be used to really help the majority of the people, would be used to hire U.S. corporations to build big infrastructure projects like power plants in their country that would help a few wealthy families who own the big industries and the commercial establishments. But the whole country would be left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So at some point we go back in and say, since you can't repay your debts, give us your oil real cheap, or vote with us on the next UN vote, or something like that. And when we weren't successful, and I mentioned in the book my situation in Ecuador with the president there, and also in Panama, I was not able to corrupt those two men, Roldos and Torrijos, and so they were taken out. They were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals. Once again, contract consultants, security consultants who were contracted assassins, not directly by the CIA. And in that way, we've really managed to create this empire. And the few occasions when the jackals and the economic hitmen are unsuccessful, like in Iraq, then we send in the military. And of course, the military is always in the background. These people all know this. So today, the president of Afghanistan and Pakistan, they all know the deal. And they know that if they don't play the game with us on one level or another, they're going to go. And incidentally, Alex, our own presidents have to understand this too. A guy like Obama now is taking a lot of criticism from his supporters, and a lot of it's very deserved. But I think one of the things that's important for us to understand is that our own presidents have been assassinated in my lifetime, and it's a constant threat. And so that makes it all the more important that we, the people, keep demanding change. We've got to keep the pressure on our politicians. We've constantly got to pressure them. We've got to put pressure on a guy like Obama so he can turn around and say to the CIA or whoever he's answering to at this particular point in time, listen, you guys, I got to do this because the people are demanding it. That's very, very important.
Absolutely. John Perkins, I think what you just said is really the central spoke to all of this, and that is the United States is captured by this system. Western Europe, England, Canada, Australia. As Westerners, we tend to think of ourselves as elitists, that we're kind of part of the establishment. I've talked to a lot of good old boys who are upper middle class, who are millionaires, that feel like they're actually part of the elite, and they're like, yeah, we staged some terror attacks. Yeah, I know about what Kermit Roosevelt did, staging terror attacks in Iran. But that's how we win. That's how we get things done. But we're losing our freedoms and liberties here as well. We're financing these international corporations and banks to go give these loans to build infrastructure, which they themselves then own at our expense. And then those third world nations and old world nations rightfully hate us, and we get the blame for it, when really we're being drug along by the system as well. So this globalist corporate system, a crony capitalism, I guess you could call it, doesn't it exploit everybody except for what Rothkopf said on this show with his book, the head of Kissinger Associates, that the 6,000 superclass, they get all the power, money, and control, but the rest of the 6,400 million of us, we get the short end of the stick.
Absolutely, yeah. And what comes around goes around. We in the United States were willing to turn a blind eye on the use of slaves, essentially, in sweatshops that make us cheap shirts and tennis shoes. We were willing to turn a blind eye on get us cheap oil, even if it requires destroying the Amazon rainforest. We don't care, give us cheap oil. We kind of turned a blind eye on that, and we always sort of said, well, of course they're doing the right thing. Nike is not hiring slaves, and Texaco isn't destroying the rainforest. Well, Nike is hiring slaves, and Texaco did destroy the rainforest, and there's a huge lawsuit in Ecuador right now that's going to be won against Texaco. And they don't do the right thing. And, we've gone through this period that really started Milton Friedman, the economist from the Chicago School of Economics, who was deeply embraced by Ronald Reagan, got us on this role of this, what I call a mutant virus of capitalism, which is to say the corporate executives don't need to be controlled. They're some sort of an elite, unlike the rest of us who never do anything wrong. I mean, we've all got to have laws to keep us from stealing or cheating on our income taxes or picking somebody's pocket. But these corporate executives, they don't need any rules and regulations. No more rules and regulations. And everything should be privatized. They should be running everything, controlling all the world's resources. And let's give everybody lots and lots of credit. Get people to take lots and lots of credit. Well, I'll tell you, credit enslaves people. If you're a union member and you've got lots of loans, you've got a big mortgage on your house, you don't want to go out and picket. You don't join the picket lines because you want to keep paying for your house so your family has a place to live. And so there's been all these things that really came up in the 70s and much more strongly in the 80s after Reagan was elected. And it just continued through Democrats and Republicans alike. God, Clinton was one of the worst. And they have served to put us all in this position that we economic hitmen back in the 70s were doing to the rest of the world. It was so successful in the rest of the world that it's been pulled on us. And now we got to get out of it, Alex. We can do it, but we've got to set our hearts and minds and souls to doing it.
Well, let's look at the alternative, and then we'll get into solutions and, get your expert opinion on the current climate and what you think those solutions and the way out are. But let's look at the alternative. If they continue this process of they're above the law, the private Federal Reserve goes before Congress and says no one can audit us, no agency, no government. If this imperial power is allowed to continue, will we have private bank chairmen wearing crowns and being worshipped? I mean, that's the logical extension of this, is kind of a Hitlerian Führer precept where, we saw Cheney and Bush saying, it's not illegal if the president does it. If something's illegal and the president does it, it's okay. And we're now seeing Obama saying, yeah, we're going to continue no rights for detainees. And, yeah, we're going to, continue having secrecy in the banking. It's clear the presidents have been turned into nothing but vestigial ceremonial creatures. So if we don't slow this down and reverse it, what will this world look like? What will this superclass who are openly above the law, what will they bring us to?
We'll all be living in Haiti, and it's happening. It's fascinating. I just saw this morning that UN has announced that Bill Clinton's going to be their new UN ambassador to Haiti. Man, that's a fascinating comment right there.